So, fellas, looks like we got an academic preying on the innocent minds of children communists on our hands today. He has had little success as a content creator, but he's been teaching kids for a decade, and he is pushing critical race theory on them without even really knowing anything about it. Luckily, Rob Noerr, one of the best commie headhunters in the debate space, has drawn this demon out of the shadows. The demon in question goes by Radical Coder or Ryan. He has made virtually no content, but your boy managed to find him trying to sell CRT to Destiny. And even the pocket-sized cumlord himself thinks it sounds racist and utterly absurd.
Fucking Christ, dude, progressives are like fucked. Hi, what's up?
So let's kick this off right with some classic commie rhetoric.
We had a long conversation about how critical race theory is primarily asserting at its core that race is not a biological concept, but rather a legal mechanism for oppressing people of color. This is the Encyclopedia Britannica description of it. And I think that, again, it's very clear that Trump has been actively against CRT. People on Trump's side have regularly and consistently enacted CRT bans and attempted to, and I mean, like, so it seems like if there's somebody who wants to believe or wants to assert and teach people that race is actually a real biological thing, they would not want people to learn the opposite is actually true. The opposite, that race is not that we know race is not that, and that race was used as a legal structure to oppress people. And if that is what they're banning from schools, I feel like that's something that white supremacists would absolutely have an affinity towards, no?
So, in the words of Norm Macdonald, that sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook to me.
Perfect response to that word salad. So this is academic communism. Very boring to listen to, very vapid. I won't do that to you for the rest of the video. Now, we're going to listen to him bring some things up, because it's impossible to call the commie out on all of their commie stuff in a conversation like this, which I would hate to have this kind of conversation, because I can't slow anything down and show receipts. So let's continue where I can show you the receipt of him being an ignorant, creepy child predator, groomer, piece of shit.
It's because that's not the way that it's put in practice. In fact, even the founders of critical race theory, I remember looking at this, I forget their names, but back in the day said that their goal was to create activists in order to do this, to push back against sort of what they saw as like white patriarchy. They used queer theory, and I forget the name of the author that they used to create sort of basically Marxist.
You say those things like they're bad.
They are bad, right? And what I'm saying is that the way
What's
that
wrong
this
with queer theory?
What's wrong with queer theory? Before I give him a Pearl River plunge through several flaming tables, I want you to think of what it takes to be called a Nazi. You know, you can tell the difference between legal immigrants and illegal aliens. You acknowledge the open attack that they openly admit to on decreasing the amount of white people through mass migration and social persecution. You give a Jew 5 across the eyes because he has those dumb little curls. Everyone to the right of homosexual Karl Marx is Nazi to them. But what about queer theory? Oh, about a terabyte hard drive of PDF files? Kid diddlers, you know what I'm saying? Let's start with Michel Foucault. Foucault's work is particularly important to queer theory in that he describes sexuality as a phenomenon that must not be thought of as a kind of natural given which power tries to hold in check, but rather a historical construct, Marxist historical materialism. Judith Butler extends this idea of sexuality as a social construct to gender identity in her book Gender Trouble, where it's theorized that gender is not a biological reality, but rather something that is performed through repeated actions. Here's the problem. In 1945, an ordinance was enacted by the French government that established an age of consent in France of 15. Michel Foucault argued that it was intolerable to assume that a minor is incapable of giving meaningful consent to sexual relations. Foucault also believed consent, as a concept, was a contractual notion and that it was not a sufficient measure of whether harm was being conducted. So, Michel Foucault, an important name in queer theory, fought to lower the age of consent below 15 to say that a child can consent to sex with an adult. Foucault, Sartre, and newspapers such as Liberation and Le Monde each defended the idea of sexual relationships with minors. What's wrong with queer theory? Well, that doesn't mean they applied any of that to queer theory, it's just how they justified relationships with minors. Judith Butler takes a different academic route.
There might be an ethics that's beyond calculation. In other words, I'm thinking about my life, which means others are thinking about it in the same way, and we are linked in this living world, on this planet, right? Which is why the interdependency that we need to understand to fight COVID is also the interdependency we need to understand to fight climate destruction.
I agree.
And so
I agree.
we need I would call it a communist ontology, quite frankly.
It's a solidarity that's thicker than any conception of
I
personal
think we
liberty.
need a radical social ontology. We need to rethink selfhood, its boundaries, its openings, to have a completely different ethics and a politics of care. So I'm pushing against the personal liberty folk right now.
Yeah, no,
Sorry, I know that's
It's such
extreme.
Okay, so we have two queer theorists that are on their way to making a gay commie pedozord. Now, if I know my audience like I think I do, you're asking yourself one question right now. What about the gay poop eating? Now, this is on YouTube, so I'm gonna have to give you the G-rated version. Mario Millet was a pivotal figure in the Italian gay liberation movement of the 1970s and a foundational thinker in queer theory. Key contributions to queer theory: transsexuality and polymorphous perversity, critique of capitalism and heteronormativity, and Freudo-Marxism. Now, I don't want to take him out of context or put words in his mouth, so let's read some passages from his book, Towards a Gay Communism, Elements of a Homosexual Critique. Now, we should shut up and listen, because he's a huge voice in the queer theory movement, and specifically as a gay man. Are you ready? Millet's conviction about the potential of Eros goes further than most queer critiques, since he includes pedophilia, necrophilia, and corpophagy in his catalog of experiences ripe for redemption. It's okay, there's a footnote at the bottom by New York University Press in 2009, called Cruising Utopia, the then and there of queer futurity. In corpophilia, also called scatophilia or scat, is the paraphilia involving sexual arousal and pleasure from feces. Having of eaten poop. This is gonna suck to read, fellas. The present repression of anal pleasure, corpophilia, and urophilia, pee-pee, is the result of a historically specific suppression. The anal desire displayed by every child reveals a potential for pleasure that is latent in every adult and reflects in the development of the individual an atheistic, erotic expression of the species, which has been progressively more negated over the millennia, and particularly in the last few centuries of capitalism. Oh, wow, a capitalist critique. That was a short jump over a long log. The demand for the restoration of anal pleasure is one of the basic elements in the critique made by the gay movement. We're listening, fellas, we're listening to you. It's what we thought, it's what we say, but you say we're wrong. Of the hypostasizing of the heterosexual genital status quo by the dominant ideology. You've probably had enough of this, right? I've had enough of it too. Let's move forward. A drastic repression of homosexuality takes place already in early childhood. The father represents himself as a decisively heterosexual persona, rejecting overt erotic contact with the son, who for his part, however, desires without undifferentiation, and hence also desires the father. Older adult males, in deference to the taboo against pedophilia, similarly reject sexual relations with the little boy. In an analogous way, the mother and adult women reject sexual relations with girl children, even if the mother does generally maintain a greater erotic intimacy with children of both sexes than does the father. Sexual relations between children themselves are also repressed, and in particular, homosexual relations.
The way
What's
that
wrong
this
with queer theory?
That's what's wrong with queer theory. The types of people that develop queer theory, it's gay commie stuff. Let's continue.
Do you acknowledge that the founders of critical race theory sought to create activists through there?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I imagine anti-racism generally is an activist movement.
Do you think it's the role of our public schools, going back as early as preschool and kindergarten, to create activists against racism?
I mean, if there's racism in potentially. Yeah, I think we want patriots who are going to fight against discrimination in our government. Absolutely. Yeah.
I think a bunch of people like you got into the academic field, and that's why we see test scores on things like math and reading declining, because people like you are more interested in indoctrinating children into racial grievance politics than teaching the shit that they should be teaching.
Rob Noerr has a very fine intuition in a very limited amount of time to say these things. So let me compliment his intuition like a fine wine with receipts. 2.5 years ago, in February of 2023, Radical Coder talked to Destiny and tried to sell him on CRT. Now, to preface this, Radical Coder doesn't quite understand it, and he's still learning it, but that won't stop him from pushing it full throttle. Even when it comes to teaching black kids math differently in a black way so their black minds can understand it.
I think is maybe the concept that we're again. I want to be clear that I'm still learning like a lot of this stuff. Like I'm trying. Because when I see like there's like 17 states I think that have like implemented some form of like critical race theory ban, and so that's why I think it's really important to like try to engage with a lot of this material with like I don't know, a lot of good faith.
I'm trying to imagine a parent like ask that question. How would a teacher respond to that?
I'm not sure. But I don't believe that there's like no good answer to that. Like the people who put this document together like probably would have a good answer to that, right?
Bro, why does he explain critical race theory in the cadence of someone that has his pants around his ankles in front of children? He's, well, why do you sound like that? He sounds like Chris Hansen just walked in the room and he's trying to explain himself.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, that's. I mean, I think that's fine. I think it's okay to. I'm not sure either. Like, I'm not sure about a lot of this stuff. I don't know. Like, I didn't study all this shit like in school or anything. Like, I learned about this stuff like more recently. What do you mean?
What specifically is applying to black students that isn't applying to white students?
What specifically is applying to black students? Well, I guess that there are. See, this is where I wish I had like more of these like hard examples of like
ways
me
that
too.
These
things.
Well, but like I'm just saying, like if we have all the
inventing this, I didn't write all these things. Okay,
no, but you gave a fight with me about it.
My main reason for coming in here is that I want to encourage you to try to have a better faith engagement with this material.
What is an example of something that applies to black students that doesn't apply to white students that justifies these changes in curriculum? And you can't give an answer. Does that bother you?
A little bit, yeah. I wish I had better answers. I would like to. That's why I'm having these conversations.
Now you might be asking yourself, why does Radical Coder want to push critical race theory and queer theory onto your kids when he himself doesn't really even know enough about them to answer functional questions from adults? Think about that. Why would you be pushing something onto a child that you yourself don't understand? If you understand something, trying to explain it to a child is difficult enough. So isn't it a little creepy that he wants to reprogram these kids' minds into different ways of being, different ways of thinking? Why else would you want to brainwash a kid so badly? Where you're talking out of your ass when somebody tries to hold you to account for what you're saying. Suspicious motive, don't you think? I also love how his name is Radical Coder. Now, when they say radical, they mean communist. Remember, the right wing, extremist, bad. The left wing, radical, good. That's how they use these words. Notice that Judith Butler goes from communism to radical in the next sentence.
I would call it a communist ontology, quite frankly.
It's a solidarity that's thicker than any conception of personal
I think we
liberty.
need a radical social ontology.
So they are using radical in the same way. If he's not a communist, he just agrees with everything communists say, okay? Come on. Now, Radical Coder has been tutoring kids for like a decade of his life.
Just one example of like what. Like I'm trying to think of like because I've tutored kids before. I did that for a little bit. I taught my son with homework and shit.
Me too.
I don't
That's
know.
like a decade of my life.
And Radical Coder is putting himself in the position to defend ethnomathematics. And he can't defend it, but he has to defend it because it's anti-capitalist and he's a dirty, queer commie. Anything to gain access to children and corrupt their minds. Am I right, fellas?
Like, tell me that this doesn't sound like something that like would come out of like an American First textbook, like a Nick Fuentes textbook, right?
I don't think so. No,
Center ethnomathematics.
Yeah.
Recognize the ways that communities of color engage in mathematics and problem solving in their everyday lives. For instance, calculating your mother's credit card rate, figuring out how much your dad owes on a payday loan. Like, what's the difference between an eighth of weed versus 2 grams? Like, what does that mean?
Wait. So those examples, they're not in this book, right?
No. But I'm saying like that's no. What are the examples? That's why I'm asking for an example. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, what are we talking about?
I don't know, but I bet that well, I mean, let's try to figure it out. Maybe this does. Let's see. Teaching mathematics can help solve problems affecting students' communities. Model the use of math as a solution to their immediate problems, needs, and desires. So again, it's about. Wait, hang on. You're going to hate this third one. Identify and challenge the ways that math is used to uphold capitalist, imperialist, and racist views.
I wasn't, honestly, I read ahead and I saw, I wasn't even going to address the one. That's clearly fucking ridiculous. I don't know why that's in it. It has anything to do with, yes. That math?
I mean, you don't think there's any way it could?
Oh, wood chipper time! You don't think this way can be rationalized? It's so postmodern. There's gotta be a way we can rationalize. There's gotta be a way where it can make sense, right? Everything's post hoc. He just knows that it has to be true, and he just has to find his way as to how it's true. This is not the kind of person you want to be teaching your kid. He has a tenuous grasp on reality. There's gotta be a way that math is too capitalist and it should be more anti-capitalist, right? But honestly, I show you the Destiny footage from before he pulled a nutty because of how good he is at criticizing the left, because he's also on the left, so he gets the best gold out of them because they're trying to really persuade him and not really argue with him, but really take the mask off and be who they really are. Now let's listen to Destiny make racist jokes trying to understand what this could possibly mean by ethnomathematics.
We have to be critical of a lot of these things.
As
we
a
have to
department, study
interrogate them,
ethnomathematics and incorporate into all classrooms. Do I need to study ethnomathematics to know why black people do bad in math classes in schools?
Wait, I mean, maybe.
I'm trying to imagine if I was like a black person and I went to a teacher and I'm like, listen, my kid is failing math, like what should I do? And the teacher hands me a book on like, try ethnomathematics. I'm like, what the fuck? And I like open it up and like page 1 is like some dude in a fucking Kwanzaa outfit or something, or I don't know what the or not, I don't even know what the name of the crazy holidays are for the black holiday shit, but whatever, Jesus. Like today we're doing like, oh, what's up guys?
Like
did you guys remember to bring your tap shoes for math class today? And his 3 fans were like, yeah, of course we did. That's good because today we're gonna learn multiplication and we all know that the only way to learn that would be, and then he'd turn on like Billie Jean from fucking, you know, Michael Jackson, Thriller would start playing. It's like dancing.
But again,
that's how black people learn math.
none of these things, no point in any of this stuff is saying that there's one way that black people need to learn math or learn any concept.
No, but it's saying that it needs to be different. It has to. It seems like it's different from white people. That's why we need ethnomathematics. Patient is like, no, okay, hold on, my little ninja, okay? Imagine Kobe Bryant shoots 21 3-pointers in a row. What's the score? And he's like, oh, 63. And it's like, there you go, dude. See, we're all good at math. Like that's what I'm envisioning in my head. I don't know what you're talking about in terms of like what is your go-to example for like a black example versus a white kid example? I don't know what that means.
Well, I guess that's why I'm saying I don't know that I would contrast those like so harshly.
But everything you're saying right now, everything you're saying could be something that Nick Fuentes is saying without examples. Because everything you're saying...
I don't think Nick Fuentes would ever engage with any of this stuff.
Dude, Nick Fuentes would have a field day. Dude, I shouldn't even mention it because I could give this dude, like, he could literally, if I was Nick Fuentes, I would take a lot of the CRT material and I would do a 30-minute segment on my stream where we do like Black Math Hour and we take like 1 page of this and we show like, oh, today we're gonna learn Black Math Hour, right? Rather than worrying about tests, black people are gonna see who can clap the most complicated rhythm from a Tupac song. And then I would have 3 people in blackface do it and we would take it out of our CRT book and that would be my content for the day. Like Fuentes could do it word for word, writing all of this shit, right? Like,
but don't worry, Radical Coder views math as like a creative field, you know? And this is where you can see how they soften the hard sciences. Math is a hard science. Sure, it's creative at very elite, advanced, high levels, like the mastery in a lot of things. But learning math isn't that creative. Maybe creative in the way that you show the hard science of math. Maybe the way you explain 2 + 2 is 4 is, yeah, sure, draw upon experience or something. I don't know. Maybe with algebra, you contextualize it in a normal situation. But he's talking about creativity to like how we even think about it, man. Like, do you have an example? Yeah, I hope I do.
Like that it's like set in stone that like there's only like one or like very, very specific and particular ways to learn math. But I think that like there's a lot of fluidity and like I think I view math as a creative field, and I think that like kind of leaning into that is part of this.
Okay, well we'll go. I mean, we can read through it. I'm sure there's a lot of examples in here. So
I hope so. There should be. I mean, if there's not, then that would be my critique. Is that it needs more examples about these specific points.
So Radical Coder is an egregiously feminized mongoloid, if you can believe it. So let's go back to present day with his conversation with Rob Noerr, now that you may have a different perspective on him.
Basically, Marxist.
You say those things like they're bad.
They are bad, right? And what I'm saying is that the way
What's
that
wrong
this
with queer theory?
Do you acknowledge that the founders of critical race theory sought to create activists through there?
Probably, yeah. I mean, I imagine anti-racism generally is an activist movement.
Do you think it's the role of our public schools going back as early as preschool and kindergarten to create activists against racism?
I mean, if there's racism potentially. Yeah, I think we want patriots who are going to fight against discrimination in our government. Absolutely, yeah.
I think a bunch of people like you got into the academic field, and that's why we see test scores on things like math and reading declining, because people like you are more interested in indoctrinating children into racial grievance politics than teaching the shit that they should be teaching, which is all the more reason that we should take the Department of Education and throw it in the fucking garbage. Nonetheless, I'll say none of the conversation on critical race theory has
the Department of Education. Just to be clear, that's what was used to ensure that desegregation happened, right?
I don't give a shit what it was originally used for. Like, since the creation of the Department of Education, the scholastic achievements of children have precipitously declined when you compare us to other developed countries. Nonetheless,
and you can attribute that directly to the Department of Education?
I think that we can. It's a debate that we can have for another day, or at least it's strongly suggested that there
so you're
is
speculating
a correlation.
That the Department of Education is
nonetheless.
Dude, I don't know how Rob Noerr talks to him for so long. So what? The Department of Education was created and our education rankings are completely tanking compared to the rest of the developed world. And Radical Coder's like, how do you know it was them? So you're just speculating? No correlation. You have to have ironclad proof of this correlation. But when it comes to critical race theory, come on, let's already believe in it. So let's end it here. Be highly critical of these teachers around your kids that cannot explain their motives and lesson plans in the king's friggin' English. Be especially wary if the ideology they're espousing has no clear prescription of a tangible endpoint and that ideology has foundational PDF files. Oh, I'd like to have a word or two with that fella. Oh my god. Fella. Maybe that's what we can do, fellas. We don't live in the UK, we don't go to the school, maybe we get a little Tony Soprano, show up and say, no, it'll be a shame if somebody were to misgender you, I understand that you present pretty feminine, I couldn't help but notice your Adam's apple and jawline, but it'd be a shame somebody would call you a fella. All I'm saying is, lay off my kid, or else me and the fellas might show up to talk to another fella. Have a good one.